All right. Well, if you've been with us on Wednesday nights, we've been looking at Christmas prophecies and kind of going back in the, in the Old Testament where these prophecies are first quoted and picked up by the New Testament writers and applied to the birth of Christ. And we've looked at a couple of them from Isaiah, and tonight we're going to look at another one. And this one is going to be in Micah. And I know I have that marked somewhere. There it is. Micah's such a little book, it kind of eludes you sometimes. This is a unique prophecy because it is, I do believe, the only Old Testament prophecy that expressly predicts that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. So this is significant. Now we not only have that a child is going to be born that will rule the nations, but now we have the specific location of where this child is going to be born, and it's going to be in Bethlehem. So we're going to be in Isaiah. We're going to be in Micah chapter 5. Find your place there. All right, let's look at verse 1. Now gather yourself in troops, O daughter of troops. He has laid siege against us. They will strike the judge of Israel with a rod on the cheek. But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose going forths are from old, from everlasting. All right, so we've got Bethlehem now identified as the birthplace of this coming one, this child that is to be born, the same one that Isaiah that refers to. Unto us a child is born. This little insignificant town, this little town of Bethlehem. Let's throw that picture up there, Phil. Should be right there. There's your little town of Bethlehem today. It doesn't look very much at all like it did, like it would have 2,000 years ago. But it's still, in the grand scheme of things, not one of your major cities in Israel. It's not what you would call all that significant, but it's significant because of the one that's born there, the one that was born there. And so that's what this prophecy is all about, that Bethlehem, that wasn't significant because of its size, because of its location. It was significant. It would be significant because of the one who was born there. Now, interestingly enough, who was the other significant ruler that was born in Bethlehem? Yeah, you said it. King David. King David was born in Bethlehem. So, but by the time of Jesus' day, really, it wasn't. It had lost whatever significance it might have gained from being the birthplace of David. It was just a small, little, sleepy village more than anything. But it was the place that was predicted to be where the Messiah would be born. So, what's going on historically and politically in the world and in Israel when Micah makes this prophecy? Let's talk a little bit about Micah first of all. When did Micah minister? He was a contemporary of Isaiah. He's going to be 8th century BC. Now, if I say 8th century, we're talking in the 700s. So, somewhere shortly before the fall of Samaria in 722 BC to shortly after. So, somewhere 750 750, 770 BC on through, maybe 710 to 700 BC, but somewhere in that time frame, he's going to be around the fall of Samaria to Assyria in 722 BC. He's going to minister a little bit before that. He's going to minister a little bit after that. Now, he's primarily a prophet to Judah, the southern kingdom. So Judah isn't the one that falls to Assyria and is carted off into captivity, but they're affected by that because they become sort of a vassal state to Assyria. They become sort of servants to them, and so Judah maintains some level of independence, but not much, because Assyria, they come in, they take the northern kingdom of Israel, and they really exert such an influence even on the southern kingdom that all of life in Judah is affected by Assyria's looming on the horizon. And so he's going to. So when he makes these prophecies, the fall of the northern kingdom is imminent, we might say, and it's going to affect what's going on in the southern kingdom of Judah as well. So if you look at kind of having that in mind, if you look at the first verse, gather yourself in troops, O daughter of troops. He has laid siege against us. What do you think what does that sound like it's describing? Right. So it's certainly talking about Jerusalem. I mean, the daughter of troops. And it certainly sounds like it's a reference to Jerusalem there, and it certainly seems to be describing a siege against Jerusalem. He has laid siege against us. Now look at the little the second part of that verse. They will strike the judge of Israel with a rod on the cheek. So there's a couple of different ways you can take this. What is when you first read that, they will strike the ruler of or the judge of Israel, or the ruler of Israel on with a rod on the cheek. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Jesus. I mean, right? And you think, well, it's talking about the scourging where they beat him, and some scholars, some interpreters take it that way. Others see it due to the in the context of this siege against Jerusalem and what's going on with Assyria, that it's talking about the enemy troops coming in and basically assaulting and insulting the king of Judah at the time, the king of Israel, the ruler of Israel. And that's why some think, well, that's why it's a reference to, you get the word judge as opposed to king or ruler, because it harkens back to the days when there was no king in Israel. In other words, this ruler of Judah has been humiliated. He's weak. He's an embarrassment. So hence the need for a new ruler. Hence the need for a strong ruler, one who would deliver his people and one who would rule the nations with the rod of iron. So in that context, it kind of starts to make sense. Here's the prophecy. Here's the situation. You've got a strong Assyria on the northern front. Israel has already fallen. Judah, is being humiliated. The ruler of Judah is being humiliated. He's being, he's being beaten, or it's the idea is almost more like a slap, like an insult. Not like he's been beaten half to death, but that he's been struck on the cheek like you would slap somebody as an insult. And so, hence the need for a strong leader, a new leader, one who would deliver his people, and one who would protect his people, and one who would not be ruled by other nations, but would rule the nations. And so that sets up the prophecy for the coming birth of this child. The same child that is referred to in the prophecies in Isaiah 7 and Isaiah 9 that we've looked at before. Now we get a prophecy of a child that's clearly the same one. Out of you shall come forth the one to be ruler in Israel, whose going forth are from old, from everlasting. Now, this is significant because now we have another prediction that this child that is going to be born is no mere human being, no mere mortal, because he is described as being eternal, from everlasting. So he's been around from everlasting. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. John, the Word. I misquoted that. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John begins his gospel by saying. So that seems to be. I kind of think that's my personal take on it. Is I think that's the right way, but like I said, many people see the verse 1 as a reference to Christ being beaten. Christ certainly was beaten. I'm just not sure this particular verse is speaking about that. All right, so if you look in verse 2, but you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, out of you shall come forth one to be ruler in Israel. So the word little here, it's translated little, it's not talking necessarily about just little as in geographical size or little in population size, but little in the sense of insignificant. You are, though you are insignificant among the people of Judah. And Bethlehem was insignificant. It really, other than being the birthplace of David, it wasn't, Jerusalem was the capital. It wasn't on the coast. It wasn't on a major trade route. It wasn't necessarily economically prosperous. It really wasn't significant. But it was going to become significant. Not based on its geography or population, but it was going to become significant because of the one who was going to be born there. This one that was to be ruler in Israel was going to be born there. So, kind of summarizing that prophecy, this is how I would summarize it. The present king of Judah is weak and embarrassing, and the only solution is for a new king to be born, not in corrupt Jerusalem, but in insignificant Bethlehem. And this one would rule the nations. This one would be the true king, the one that would rule in the same vein as David, and even greater than David, we now know. Questions on those verses or comments? Yes? About Ezra? Uh-huh. Say that again. About a 2-hour walk from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. That's it's 7 miles, roughly, from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. So how long, can you walk 2 miles can you walk 7 miles in 2 hours? That'd probably be 2 hours for me. Somebody could really go get it, could do it quicker than that, but yeah, right. So it's, I want to say, and I think I'm right on that, it's like 7 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. So it's kind of one of those deals that it just kind of gets swallowed up in Jerusalem. It's kind of one of those, you don't really think about Bethlehem because because once you get to Bethlehem, you're almost at Jerusalem kind of deal. It's like what is the town near? I mean, is it Jinx that's like swallowed up in Tulsa? I don't know Oklahoma geography very well, but anyway. Moving on. That's right. Okay. Thanks, Parker. All right. Let's look on verse 3. Therefore he shall give them up until the time that she who is in labor has given birth. Then the remnant of his brethren shall return to the children of Israel, and he shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall abide for now, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth, and this one shall be peace. All right, so what do you think this is describing? Verse 3, he shall give them up until the time that she is who is in labor is given birth, and the remnant of his brethren shall return to the children of Israel. So what's it talking about? He shall give them up. What's it talking about there? Overlooked. So something very significant, historically significant happened. Pat, you look like you're just dying to tell it. You think it has like an eschatological thing? Yeah, quite possibly so. I think in its immediate context, it's probably talking about the exile, because they do go into exile and it says until the time that she who is in labor has given birth. So they're in captivity in Babylon till it's not immediately before Christ is born, but they're in captivity for a while, and then they return to the land prior to the birth of Christ. So set aside. I mean, the significance of Israel. Well, that kind of gets into kind of what Pat was saying, kind of the eschatological idea that an end time thing. No, you're fine. I'm just trying to hear you. Right. Well, and this is true. I mean, they go away and they're carried away into exile. There really is no Israel. There is no Judah for a great number of years, and then they're allowed to return when Persia comes to power. They're allowed to return. The temple is rebuilt. The city is rebuilt. And pretty much any citizens that want to return are given the opportunity to do that prior to the birth of Christ. Now, it's quite possible. Well, and you may say, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. I just don't think that's right at all. And you may be right. But I do want to show you something just for kicks in the book of Revelation. Just to show you that sometimes this idea of a woman giving birth is used symbolically. And I want to show you in Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12. Just go to your maps and take a left and you'll be there. And I'm in verse 1. Now I want us to read this together, and you tell me what this is talking about, all right? I'm in verse 1 of Revelation 12. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Now, who do you think that would be? Let's just take in that one verse. It sounds a whole lot like Israel, because it's talking of, certainly, and the giveaway seems to be the 12 stars, reference to the 12 tribes. Now look at verse 2. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. Now that sounds like who? Satan. Verse 4, his tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. That sounds a lot like, the war in heaven and 1/3 of the angels falling with Satan. Now look at the back part of verse 4. The dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Now, who is that? Clearly, it must be Christ. No one else would fit that. Verse 6, the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. We won't get into the symbolism of the 1,260 days tonight. That'll be for another discussion. But it seems clear to me that that's not talking about Mary. Mary didn't run off to the woods for 1,260 days after Jesus was born or after the resurrection. It's talking about the people of God. It's talking about Israel, and not even necessarily nation Israel as much as Israel in the sense of the true people of God. So the people of God, through his people delivers the Messiah that the dragon, Satan, wants to destroy. And when the dragon, thinks it has the death blow, then the child is caught up to God and his throne, and then God's people flee into the wilderness for a period of time. Symbolic to me, it seems obvious that it's symbolic, talking about the persecution of God's people for a time, but that the child will ultimately rule the nations with a rod of iron. To me, it's kind of all the same deal. I mean, I think what Micah talks about and what John talks about in Revelation are kind of all the same deal. I mean, because you go back to Micah here and read that again. He shall give them up until the time that she who is in labor has given birth, and the remnant of his brethren shall return to the children of Israel. And he shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, the majesty of his name of the Lord, and they shall abide, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth. I don't know how you see that, but to me, I mean, what John describes in Revelation 12 and what Micah describes in Micah 5:3 and 4 are one and the same. You just get one, 100 years or so after the birth of Christ, and you get another, 700 years before the birth of Christ, but they're one and the same. Questions, comments? All right. So what do we read about the Messiah? What theological truths do we read in verse 4 here? Some of the things that jump out to me, it says he will shepherd his flock. Now, what does a shepherd do for his flock? He feeds them, leads them, protects them. So you've got this idea of leading them, providing for them, protecting them. All of that is wrapped up in shepherding the flock. So there's power, there's majesty. So this one is obviously going to be glorious with the Lord's glory. He's going to be powerful, and he's going to exude this, that's not the right word. He's going to have this universal reign to the ends of the earth. So over and over again, these prophecies about Christ, it's not just that he's going to be born in Bethlehem and live and die and rise again, but that he is coming and reign. I mean, you cannot get away from that. I mean, and that's one of those things that my understanding and to some extent my views have changed over time, because I really didn't see a lot of that early. I mean, when 30 years ago, when I first, picked up my Bible and seriously started to read it, I mean, I'd never really heard a lot about, what do we hear? Jesus died on the cross, He rose again, and if you love Him, you go to you go to heaven to be with Him when you die. But man, you cannot escape this idea that Jesus is coming back and reign here, and the nations will bow before Him. It's everywhere. Old Testament, New Testament, it's everywhere. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's going to be an amazing time when He comes, and we get to be with Him. We get to be a part of that. All right. Any questions on Micah? Because I want us to now jump to the New Testament and look at Matthew chapter 2 and see how Matthew picks up on this prophecy and applies it to Christ. So let's take a look at verse 1. I'm going to read, now the actual prophecy is in verse 6, but I want to read the first 11 verses of chapter 2 just so we can kind of get it in context as to what's going on. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him also. And when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Okay, so true or false, by the 1st century A.D., the prophecy in Micah 5:2 was widely held to be a reference to the birth of the Messiah. That is true. And I think it's kind of telling because, the wise men, they come to Herod the king and they say, Where is the one that's born King of the Jews? Now here's the irony. Herod was supposed to be this converted Jew. He was, he built the temple and he did all these benevolent works for the people of the Jews and all this. He didn't know. He couldn't tell them. He has to go to the scribes, and he says, Hey, where's the one born King of the Jews? Where's the Messiah supposed to be born? And they're able to tell him right off the bat. They don't say, Hey, we'll have to research that and get back to you. They immediately know. Well, in Bethlehem, and they quote Micah 5:2. So it certainly by the time of the birth of Christ, it was widely held that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. And that's why he goes out and slaughters all the male children. He's scared. Yeah. In trying to protect his own kingdom, he missed the one true king. And here's the sad part about the whole deal. He was. If you estimate that Jesus was born about 6 BC, which that's no one has the exact date, but that's when most scholars would put it. somewhere between 4 to 8 BC, somewhere in there. So even if you put him about 6 BC born, Herod died in 4 BC. So he's dead in 2 years. And he had a chance to see the king, worship the king, and he blew it, trying to protect the kingdom that he was going to lose in 2 years anyway. So now here's interesting, little interesting tidbit. Matthew, he quotes the scribes as quoting Micah 5:2, but he changes it just a little bit. How does he change it? Do what? So if you look at Micah 5:2, but you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah. And then you get to what Matthew quotes, but you, Bethlehem and Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. In other words, he has changed it from though you are little to you are not the least. Now, why would he do that? Well, it seems as though he's picking up on the fact that Jesus has fulfilled this prophecy. And that while Bethlehem was before insignificant, little and insignificant, no longer are they the least. No longer are they insignificant because of the one who is born there. And so he very subtly kind of adds that into this quotation from Micah 2. You, Bethlehem and the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So he seems to be giving us, even in his quotation, a little clue that, hey, Jesus is the fulfillment. He wants to leave no doubt that Jesus is the fulfillment. Before the time of Christ, Bethlehem was little and insignificant, but by no means are they the least. By no means are they little insignificant anymore because of the one that was born there, Jesus Christ. So, what do you see as the ties between the prophecy of Isaiah and the prophecy of Micah concerning the Messiah? They really are, aren't they? They really are about the same. They both predict the birth of this child who will deliver Israel and rule the nations. So you really have two men, two contemporaries, who are basically saying the same thing. They each give a little bit different details. Isaiah gives that you will call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. Now this is significant because now this child is now being referred to as God, as deity. So that's certainly significant. But then it's also significant what Micah gives us because he gives us the detail of where he's going to be born, in Bethlehem. And not just that he's going to be born, but where he's going to be born. And this is significant because you wouldn't, if you were just trying to predict if you were just trying to randomly guess where the Messiah would come from, what would be your first guess? Jerusalem would be my first guess. It's where the kings live. If the Messiah was going to be of the line of David, and where are the line of David, where are they living now? They're ruling, and where are they ruling? Jerusalem. So it would stand to reason that he would be from Jerusalem, but not from Jerusalem. He's going to be born in Bethlehem. So these prophecies about the birth of the Messiah, where he's going to be born, what that birth is going to look like, all of these things, it has extreme significance in the field of Christian apologetics. Now, you understand what apologetics is, right? Apologetics is being able to defend your faith. Basically, it's a proof or a defense of the Christian faith to the world, if you want to put it that way. So why would this be so significant in the field of Christian apologetics, these prophecies concerning the birth of Christ? They all agree. And here's the thing. If I wanted to pretend, if I wanted to pretend that I was Jesus, if I wanted to pretend that I was a Messiah, okay, and I was a great magician, I might be able to fool people into thinking that I took and made water into wine. David Copperfield can probably make water turn into wine, the illusion of it, right? I could convince you that a deaf person could hear. There's faith healers all on the TV that are convincing people that they can do that, right? So if all Jesus did was come and try to copy or make his life fit the prophecies concerning the Messiah, it opens the door for the skeptics to say, well, yeah, but he wasn't really the Messiah. He just like orchestrated his life and the events around his life to look like that. Even ministering in Galilee. I mean, he could have gone up there and just did that so that people would say, oh, look, he's in Galilee. There's two things that you can't really fake. What's that? Where you're born is one, and what's the other? Events around your birth, and really, unless you commit suicide, the events around your death, right? There's two things you have very little control over. That's the time you're born and the time you die. So to me, I mean, the two great proofs of the authenticity of Christ as the Messiah are wrapped up in his birth and his death. He was born in Bethlehem, as the prophets foretold. 700 years before his birth, they foretold he would be born in Bethlehem. They foretold that the virgin would give birth. All of these things. And then, of course, there's the whole events surrounding his death. That he was crucified on Passover. That's who can orchestrate that? Yes, if you kill yourself, maybe, but not to be executed at a certain time. He called his shot. On the third day, I'll rise again, and sure enough, he did. So those are huge, and these prophecies about the birth of Christ are crucial for proving that Jesus is who he said he was. Yes. Did you? Yeah. All right. Questions, comments? Right. 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 Which is actually lends credence to the truth of the story. Because if you were interviewing witnesses to a crime, and they all came and told the exact same details of the story, what would you say? They had gotten, what's that, collusion? Is that what they call that? In other words, they've gotten together and they had they'd gotten their stories down before, but you expect witnesses to corroborate. Is that the word I'm looking? Corroborate each other's story, but give different details, which, the Gospels do. All right, well, I've enjoyed tonight with you. Now, next Wednesday night, we will be doing an all-church caroling, and you don't get excused absence by skipping out. You get to go sing with us. It'll be fun. We're going to have a good time. It really will be fun. So I encourage you to come and be a part of that. Remember, Sunday night is the Candlelight Lord's Supper, so I hope that you're making plans to be here for that. And Christmas is almost upon us, so I hope that you're prepared for that. So let's close in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this chance to study your word, and God, I just thank you so much for the birth of Jesus, Lord, and the one that is to rule nations. Lord, may you rule our heart tonight and every day. And I pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.